This is a request that has been asked for a ridiculous amount of time since starting this arcade port series a couple of months back. So here you go, this is Rolling Thunder, which released back in 1986 in arcades by Namco. People in North America would have seen an Atari logo on the arcade cabinet for this game at the time, as Atari did distribute it there. So I will be honest, Rolling Thunder isn't a game I've ever invested much time into over the years. Of course, I know of it and its sequels, and I also know that the original arcade game is a well-loved game too. I played this properly prior to recording this video, and of course instantly thought of Shinobi. They're very similar in how they look and how they play. Now, I got myself thinking, which game came first? Of course, I now know that Shinobi came later in 1987, which I covered in this series a little while back, as well as its sequel Shadow Dancer. It is very unlikely you've never heard of Rolling Thunder. It gets classed as one of those classic 1980s run-and gun games. If you don't know what it is about, well, we play as a character named Albatross in the game, who is sent on a mission to find a female agent who also works for the world's crime police organisation, and of course she's been captured by the baddies. The game arms you from the start with a pistol. We can press up when we see doors. Now, this hides us from enemies, and enemies also come out of doors, so it's always best to be vigilant when approaching them. And outside of particular doors, we'll often see images, which indicates that there's either ammo or, say, machine guns hidden inside of them. It is a fairly challenging game to play. Now, before I start, I will mention here that the infamous Tiratex developed all of the home computer versions, and US Gold released them. Now, this could be disastrous, but we shall see throughout this video. We also have a particular platform where it was released in a couple of different countries, releasing by different companies. So today we are ranking from worst to best the 1986 classic Namco arcade game, which is Rolling Thunder. Something seemed off in this Commodore 64 version. This is Rolling Thunder Doorless Edition. So what can I say? This looks terrible, but let's remind ourselves who actually developed this. Need I say more? So we have no railings here, and so the cool animation of jumping over railings is gone entirely here. You will notice those finely detailed sprites here, or perhaps you should see nice sprites here, but instead we got uninspired, over-pixelated mess. That would simply give Shadow Warriors on the Commodore 64 a run for its money. As I was walking through the first stage, I was expecting to see much more of it, but Tiratex even degraded this version by taking around quarter of it away. We don't have the tire section here either. We just jump down into the lower area, walk over some blocks, and that's it, end of the first part. One of the most irritating things here is jumping the higher platforms. It just feels or seems like it doesn't want to work sometimes, which can be annoying as sometimes we do need to jump to higher levels in order to get past boxes which are in the way. We have blocky baddies that will continue to jump up and down in teams. I wouldn't even say this was a tough version of the game like some other versions had. The pace of the game is likely better at the 8-bit computer versions, but by no means is this a wonderful version of Rolling Thunder. The music produced for this version is frankly embarrassing for the Commodore 64 releasing in 1987. The game is much like other Tiratex games, half finished and well below average. Let's be fair, Rolling Thunder is a fairly challenging arcade game, even with the game running at full speed. Meet the Amstrad CPC home conversion. This one released in 1988. I'm actually going to cut this version some slack. As we know through the many arcade home ports that I've covered in this series, the Amstrad CPC had many sluggish games, and in some cases just felt and looked like ZX Spectrum hand-me-downs. So sure, the frame rate here isn't the greatest by a long shot, but I guess the gameplay after getting used to this slow pace isn't bad. I mean, as a game itself, it is playable, just choppy. It's a brightly coloured version, that's for sure, and there is no denying it looks like Rolling Thunder, but just an 8-bit version of it. It's not perfect though. I found it a little troublesome jumping up to higher platforms and sometimes jumping downwards too. Rolling Thunder without a doubt is a type of game that needs much faster gameplay, and this can be seen here when gangs of enemies get together and will kill you immediately as your control response is slow due to how slow this version is. As long as you play this game relatively slowly yourself, then you should be fine here. One particular annoyance here was attempting to shoot down an enemy who hides inside of the tyres. It's normally a case of jumping on top of the middle of the tyres, ducking and shooting to take that enemy down. Not here though, you can't seem to do this with the Amstrad version. Sprites in this version aren't too bad, jumping animations are fairly good here. The music isn't quite there with this version, it sounded a little depressing, but we have sound effects which aren't too bad. The starting screen of the game isn't really too bad either. I bet you were thinking you might see another particular 8-bit computer version here, right? No, this is Atari ST's 1988 release, and it's pretty much on par with the Amstrad's version in terms of slow frame rates, which hinders the gameplay greatly. Without a doubt, this game doesn't work well with this speed. Like I said before, for the Amstrad's version, it's okay once you get used to playing it this slow, which really shouldn't be the case. Sure, some ST games were slower than other 16-bit computers, but this game in particular is ultra slow. It really is just the Amstrad CPC conversion, only with 16-bit colors and improved sound. If I didn't know better, I would actually say this is the same game as the Amstrad's version. Still, regardless, we have a full stage here, and it is playable, although not really enjoyable. Even the way Albatross enters door to collect ammo or weapons, the animation is the same here as the Amstrad's game. Very unlikely one of the worst Commodore Amiga arcade conversions of all time. As you can see here, not only does this look as slow paced as the Atari ST's version, but I'm actually convinced it is the Atari ST version, only better coloured and improved sound. In other words, a direct port of the Atari ST game, or vice versa, I'm not sure of that. Either way, the only reason this is above the ST's release is because of the brighter colours and better sound. This is a slow to play and just isn't much fun at all, pretty much like everything else so far. Something I will note here, just like the ST's version, both will prevent you from shooting, or at least really slow down when there's too much happening at once on the screen at the same time. As poor as the Commodore 64 version was, even that could manage to do this better. Even the enemies here are all the same colour. I might have thought that for older systems like the Amstrad CPC or even the C64, but for a 16-bit computer like the Amiga, this game is extremely poor. It's also likely the worst Amiga arcade conversion I've ever covered so far in this arcade port series. You know, these 16-bit computer releases originally cost $24.99 in the UK on release. With today's inflation, that would have cost just under £70. If you paid for this release at the time, I bet you would have been very angry. I know I would have been. Granted, this ZX Spectrum 48K 1988 release lacks colours and music, but let's be honest, the other versions so far lag so badly, playing them wasn't particularly any fun at all. So why rank this version over the other two 8-bit computer versions and the other two 16-bit versions? Well, simply put, this scrolled a little better, much better in fact, and wasn't a massive issue when a few enemies appeared on screen at once. I'll be honest, I made it through the first part of the game only losing 3 lives, whereas most other versions caused me a lot of deaths and stress. This is a more complete version and character design looks good for what it is. Jumping to higher levels and lower levels seemed easier here too. For those out there who claim I hate Spectrum, well, this is proof to the point where my actual preferred 8-bit system was ranked here in the worst place. When Albatross swings his legs here after jumping, his legs are really like the arcade arcade game itself when they spread right out. Again, is this a great game? Despite its several cutbacks like other versions, it's not bad for what it is, and considering Teratex developed it, then I'd likely say this was one of their more playable games, certainly where this particular game is involved. Hit collision detection is okay here. One thing I did notice with this particular version is that enemies do tend to shoot here a hell of a lot compared to the arcade game. From the absolute nonsense that Teratex developed with US gold releasing those games, we actually got a fairly decent version for both the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System. Japan's release was by Namco, and outside of Japan it was released as an unlicensed version of Tengen. They are very similar. What you see in the gameplay is the Tengen release. This was like a breath of fresh air to play. No longer do we have a version which slugs along. No longer do we have a version without doors. This is clearly the winner for many reasons. Firstly, the music here replicates the source material very well, and the sound effects are just as good too. We have different colours used on enemies, which indicates to the player that certain enemies only take one shot to kill, where other colours indicates a couple of shots. If you take a look at enemies dying in this version, you'll actually see that they evaporate into the ground after you shoot them, just like the arcade game. This is easy to control, and when using a machine gun, once finding it, this looks like you're actually using a machine gun. It is brightly coloured, and jumping up the platforms and jumping to the ground is simple here. Truly is the best version of this game, full stop. And that's it for ranking the various different versions of Rolling Thunder today. A lot of you likely will be shocked that Spectrum ranked so high. Like I say, none of those Teratex releases was particularly any good, and the Spectrum game itself was literally put in that particular place because it just scrolled better. But anyways, which version was you let down with back in the day? Did you actually enjoy this game on your home micro at the time? Or do you agree with me that the NES or Famicom versions deserved first place? Anyways, as always, thanks for watching. Until next video comes along, stay retro.